including a lot of Republican women. And so the low-wage workers, they pay plenty of taxes and payroll, and in sales tax and income tax. I should say sales tax. So if they're paying more, that is a contribution to decrease the deficit. Also, it's people, the low salary workers are people that can't afford to just stash it away. They need to spend it, which will increase our economy and boost our economy. So I just think it's a win-win for everybody if the minimum wage is increased. And what I was saying was, I was shocked that in Nevada, although we have a higher minimum wage, if those employees are receiving health care benefits, then the employer is allowed to pay them $7 1/4. And kids under 20, for 90 days, they're allowed to pay them $4.25 an hour. I mean, that's what I pay for a half gallon of milk. A half gallon of milk. And they have to work an hour for it in our state. Some kids, college kids. So I think this is a win-win-win if we increase the minimum wage to $9 an hour. And I'm hoping that Congress will get together, and since an overwhelming amount of Americans support it, if the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate want to decrease our deficit and boost our economy, that is a way to do it that will not cost us any money. It will not cost us any money to do that. So I am asking you tonight if you will consider raising the minimum wage and voting for it. And I'm hoping you will.
Well, I think that, so let's go over a couple of things that were put out there first. So while the law in Nevada, if you're not getting health care benefits, is that the minimum wage is $1 more than the federal minimum wage. Yeah. So the proposal, I think, was to raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour. So that would make the minimum wage in Nevada $10 an hour. Now, yes, they would pay more sales tax if they go out and buy more things. But that doesn't come to the deficit. Sales tax goes to the local, doesn't come to the federal deficit. Sales tax goes to the state and local government, not federal government. They'll pay payroll tax. Well, that goes to Social Security. It doesn't go to the deficit. It doesn't go to the deficit.
Well,
so there's no.
That's one of the benefits, sir. That
but
we're
there's no
concerned
impact.
about Social
There's no
Security
impact
as
on the
well.
deficit by increasing the minimum wage.
Pardon?
There's no impact on the deficit directly by increasing the minimum wage.
Well, that wasn't my point, sir.
But you raised it as one of the things that would lower our deficit.
That's one, but
right.
I mean, it's just one of the
Yeah,
benefits.
I'm running the list. I'm running the list of the things that you brought up, and I just started there. The other issue that's been raised before, and we had this debate when Nevada raised its minimum wage back in 2005, 2007, when they raised the minimum wage, is that then you have what's considered like wage creep or wage crowding. You hire somebody at $10, the person who's working there at $10, now they expect to get $1 an hour raise. Okay, when you look at a lot of these low margin, a lot of the lower wage workers work in the service industry, which is a very low margin, their profit margin is 2, 3, 4% to begin with. All these things have a negative impact on the total number of jobs that are available. And a lot of the research has shown that increasing the minimum wage actually decreases the number of entry-level jobs. Now, I've looked at the research, so I can say that it is out there. So I think that, again, as I said, I wait to get a bill in front of me to see what is in the bill, and then I make a determination as to whether or not I think it's in the best interest of the folks back home. And until I see a bill, if those questions are addressed, then I'll determine how I need to vote. But there are concerns with raising the minimum wage. Just like there's pros, there's cons. And so those things have to be weighed within the determination of the vote. Quickly.
Quickly, if you are making the minimum wage, you're making $14.5 a year. I mean, I know that senior citizens who often have an income less than that, and that's their sole income, and they're using like senior centers to augment their income.
Well, I think that there's also been a change in our economy. Back several years ago, the minimum wage wasn't the minimum wage wasn't meant to be the sole source of income for a family. It might have been somebody who had another income, working on a job, 2 incomes in the family, I understand that. But in today's economy, that's not necessarily the case. Now, a household's lucky if they have 1 person working, no less 2. So that's why I say, wait for the bill to be drafted and see how the bill is drafted, and then determination will be made.
Suggested.
967.
Jumping back to the gun violence issue here real quick. A number of years ago, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention were specifically barred from doing research on the causes and possible preventions of gun violence in America. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to support re-allowing the
Yes.
CDC to investigate possible preventions and causes of gun
Without a
violence.
doubt, that's their job.
Well,
I understand. I
people
know.
in Congress in the past voted to.
I can't take responsibility for people in the past have done. But the fact is, that's the CDC's job. And I think that's one of the things, especially when one of the discussions that's been brought forward is the relationship between, media violence, video games, and all these kinds of things, and is there an impact on somebody, whether or not they're going to be more likely to do a mass shooting? The research needs to be done, and if we're going to do it, then it should be done, at least funded through the CDC.
So can I take by your enthusiasm that you might be willing to put forward a bill that would do that?
I think that, so what happens is, what happened in that case, it's not necessarily a bill to do it, it'll be an amendment to the appropriations bill if we ever do an appropriations bill. What happened was when the CDC got their money in their appropriations bill, somebody offered an amendment that would prohibit them from using that money for that purpose. Okay? So, the goal is to defeat that amendment, and I would work to do that.
991. 991.
Wait, in the back, somebody get that.
Get her a stool.
Thank you for coming to talk with us. I just have a short thing. I want to know what's going on with the gas. In a week and a half, our gas has gone up 75 cents at some gas station. I mean, you hear stories, you read. 1 minute they're saying the more gas we use, the higher it gets. The less gas we use, the higher it gets. I mean, we have reports that our country has more gas than any country in the world, but yet our gas is more than anybody, and not more than other countries, I realize that. But I mean, in a week and a half, 75 cents, that's a lot of money for us.
You are exactly right. I know that the last time I got gas at the USA Gasoline on Horizon Ridge and Stephanie, it was $2.99. And I came back and I went to pull in, I think, oh, that's cheap gas. I want to pull in to refill my tank. And it was $2.75. You're like, oh my God, what happened in the last 2 weeks? I don't have an answer to that question. That's the question I'm asking. What happened?
$3.75.
I think there's a lot of speculation on the causes of fluctuations in gas prices. And it is a matter of supply and demand. It's a matter of what's going on in the Middle East when there's potential disruption. I mean, there's a lot of different things that play into it. But to be honest, in all honesty with you, I don't have an answer to why gas would go up 75 cents in 1 week, and it's something that we're trying to get an answer to ourselves.
But a couple of weeks ago, Iraq wrote a report and said they're only charging us $1 a gallon. So, I mean, come on.
Well, like I said, I owe you an answer on that one, because I actually have my staff looking into that. When I got home and refilled my tank, I'm like, holy smokes. From when I was last home, it's up 75 cents. So if make sure we get your information, and when I get an answer, I'm going to call you right and let you know what it is.
Well.
Number 5. 005. 005. That's me. Good evening, Congressman. Thank you for having this town hall meeting. My name's Ed Smith, and I live here in Henderson. And I would like to make a couple of comments and ask you to comment on the comments.
So I'm going to ask you to try to be quick, because a lot of people still wait for their tickets to get
I
home.
understand, it won't be long.
Okay.
First of all, one of the biggest issues here that many people here have brought up are debated relatively regularly where you work. The problems that I see is that the Republicans try to compromise with the other side of the aisle. And the other side of the aisle does not want to compromise. Right? And the other side of the aisle is using the Republicans, abusing the Republicans, and it filters down to everybody sitting in this room, including these fellas. All right? And I think that all the people on your side need to take a much stronger stand on all of these issues that are important. I will tell you, just as sure as God made little green apples, all right, the first congressman, the first senator that comes through on his white horse challenging these things in a real sense, and not some political sense, okay, that politician's going somewhere.
Yes.
And that those moves should not be made from fear, like you might not get reelected. Those moves need to be made with strength and courage. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comment. It was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be by your intro. Look, I think, the fact is, even though we still, in the electorate in November re-elected a divided government, they re-elected a divided government. But it doesn't mean that they don't expect their government to get something done on their behalf, to work on their behalf. And as an elected individual, that's my job, is to see what the needs are of the folks in my community and the constituency that I represent here in Nevada 3 and work on their behalf. And, you know, look, I've taken a stand on issues that I'm adamantly opposed to. Because I believe that that's what's in the best interest of the district based on the folks that I talk to. There are times when I vote 100% the other way. Because I think it's what's in the best interest of the folks, especially like on housing issues, because it's what's important for people back here. And so that's why I was elected in real. That's the tack that I take. I will take a stand on those issues that are important. They're all important, but I will take a stand when a stand is necessary. But I'm also willing to work to get something done for the folks that I represent.
965. This will be me. Most of the questions I had were already asked, so I'm going to change the title here a little bit. You mentioned about doing more for the folks back home. Would you consider writing a bill to stop the tax cuts for companies that give jobs overseas and give them to the companies that keep them here? Can we stop? I mean, oil companies, all these tax breaks. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Look, great questions. And I think that this is the debate over overall tax reform of our tax code. Look, nobody thinks, I don't think anybody in here would agree that a company like GE should get away without paying any income tax. Zero. Anybody here think that's a good idea? I don't. I mean, they benefit from having a company here. They benefit from having customers here. They should pay something. And so that goes back to tax reform, closing loopholes, deductions, subsidies that allow certain entities to get away without paying any income tax. And that was what we actually proposed last session as part of increasing revenue, was to close the loopholes, subsidies, and deductions to increase revenue. It wasn't what was accepted, and we wound up with the tax rates that passed January 1st. But that's what we proposed. And I think, look, it's not whether it's a specific targeted industry. It's because, look, the oil companies are following the tax. It's the tax code that allows them to do it, right? It's the tax code that allows them to do it. They're taking the same deductions that are there for any other business in certain circumstances. There's not a specific oil company tax deduction in the tax code. It's the general business tax deductions that allow any company to expense certain items. And that's what we need to do when we go in and look at comprehensive tax reform, is closing those loopholes, deduction subsidies, and making sure that companies like GE or whomever are paying income taxes. The first part about companies going overseas versus companies staying here, yeah, that goes back to basically the same answer. We've got to get rid of those loopholes and deductions that allow that to happen. And the only way we're going to do that is through tax reform.
Is that something that you can initiate?
Well, I don't sit on the Ways and Means Committee, and that's the committee that does it, but they are looking at it. There's already been discussions about how to move forward with tax reform in the 113th Congress.
969. 969. 983. 983. 990.
far as I'm not I'm sorry, minimum wage. When somebody's earning minimum wage, again, I don't earn minimum. Research shows they don't save it, they spend all the money that they earn. Okay? So when you're saying that certain companies will lay people off because they have to raise the minimum wage, that's baloney. The reason is when people spend more, it increases the economy, it gets better. So instead of buying 5 loaves of bread, the person buys 10 loaves of bread, which means the banker will hire more people. That's just one example where you're wrong on your position there. The other thing is, with the debt ceiling, when you don't raise the debt ceiling, you mess up our economy. And the way you do that is because interest rates go up. It's like you going into a restaurant, charging your meal, eating your meal, and then when the bill comes, you don't pay for it. What happens to your interest rate when that happens? The credit card company says, fine, you were paying 10%, now you're going to pay 15% interest. So that's what happens with the United States. When you don't raise the debt ceiling, sir, the interest rates go up, which means our government has to buy at a higher interest rate, which means the banks have to buy at a higher interest rate, which means they pass it on to us at a higher interest rate.
So I'm going to ask you, do you have a question in here somewhere? Do you have a question, sir? Okay, all right. Appreciate your statements. Appreciate your statements, and I will agree to disagree with you because for everything that you have said, I can give a counter argument with data that shows that your positions aren't completely accurate as well. So, but thanks for attending and thanks for voicing your concerns.
002. 975.
Yes. Yeah. A few things. First of all, you
Wait,
said...
I can't hear you. So.
I can talk louder if
Okay,
you
well,
want.
if you want to move up closer.
But I want everyone to hear. First of all, you said that Obama wanted the sequestration. He does not. Congress voted for it. That's both sides. Boehner's thrilled with it. He said he got 98% of what he wanted. He's all over the video saying that. Okay? Second of all, Obama in 4 years deported more people south of the border than Bush did in 8 years, madam. Also, when you said about this defense spending, there are approximately 190 countries in the world. The U.S. spends more than all of them put together on defense. Okay? Let me finish. And then you said that it'll hurt our veterans. The end of September, the Senate voted down a bill to put 100,000 vets back to work. They also voted down giving the families of fallen soldiers, their families, a cost of living increase on their death benefit. But the good news was they voted to go on vacation for the month of October, okay? So let's just be clear about veterans and also the U.S. Post Office, who the Republicans are trying to destroy, are the #1 employer of veterans in the United States. Now, I just want to clear up those few things.
What's that question?
Yeah, what's the question?
Okay, so,
that's very
all right,
nice
so let
of
me
you.
answer those things, because one, it was President Obama who insisted that the sequester be put into the bill in order to raise the last debt ceiling. It was his requirement that it be in the bill.
That's not true.
And it is too true, ma'am. It's documented in multiple venues that it was his requirement to be put into the bill. Well, yeah, Congress passed a bill because we voted to raise the debt limit, but that was President Obama's requirement to put the sequester in. So that is the fact that's well documented. Excuse me, folks, you folks can stop kind of bobbing there so I can keep. Yeah. I don't want to be disrespectful.
That's okay.
So that was that issue. Look, I don't control what the Senate does. You can talk to Senator Reid about what the Senate does. Okay? I have no control over the bills that they voted for or against.
But both sides voted for
no, the House did not vote on that.
Excuse me, they most certainly did, and
measure.
Boehner said he was very happy with it. He got 98%.
No, I'm talking about the issue you talked about with veterans and cutting defense. I'm talking about, because you mentioned that was a bill in the Senate. I have nothing to do with what goes on the Senate floor. So that is the answer to that issue. Look, I have worked harder than just about anybody in Congress on veterans issues. Being a veteran myself, working to make sure that our men and women, whether they're on active duty or have left the service, get the full benefits that they've earned and that they were promised. I'll put my record on veterans votes up against anybody in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, but it's a group that's very near and dear to my heart. So, look, the issue on defense, cutting defense, that actually doesn't cut the veterans. The DOD budget is totally separate than the veterans budget. So it has no, cutting defense doesn't impact the veterans. That's out of Veterans Affairs, and that's a separate budget.
Well, you were saying it would hurt the military.
Right, the military would hurt our national defense. It would hurt them, that's what...
Don't you want a smarter defense than just having, you know, it's not battleship where you get more ships.
Well, I can tell you that when these cuts go through, if they go through, it will give us the smallest army since World War II, the smallest navy since World War I, the smallest air force since the Air Force was created in 1948.
But
Now,
do we need that?
that's not,
Do we need
what
that?
I'm saying is, the President's Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, said that those cuts will be devastating to our ability to defend our nation. If the next 190 or the next 300 nations spend more money, that makes no difference to how much we spend. We need to spend what we need to spend to keep our nation safe, to enforce all laws, and to keep our nation sovereign. So I don't think that you can compare apples to oranges.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about boots on the
That's
ground.
one question, and that's it.
Yeah, that's it, next.
We
I thought-
don't have the same right. No, it's a dialogue.
It's not a discussion?
No.
Oh.
No.
11, 975.
I was 975. That was 975.
Here's 11. 11, sorry.
Wait, we're going to the back first.
Congressman Heck, thank you for doing this with us tonight. I have a question. Earlier, there was mention about gun control and NICS, the system used to check to see whether a person is an authorized possessor of a firearm. And about a little over a year ago, October of 2011, I contacted the Nevada Department of Public Safety, where they have the Brady Bill unit, and those are the folks that are authorized by the FBI to check the NICS system for authorized users. And I was told, I was inquiring for the purposes of law enforcement, who local law enforcement officers come into possession of firearms often, and eventually those firearms are returned to the original owners. However, there wasn't a procedure in place where the law enforcement officers could access NICS to make sure that before they returned firearms to persons that they were not on the, they weren't one of the illegal possessors. There's as you know well, there's a federal law, Brady Bill, and the Gun Control Act, and a few amendments, as well as the Nevada laws. On the 17th of November, the Department of 2011, Department of Public Safety issued a letter saying that they did not, would not, and do not, and will not provide that information of the database access to local law enforcement. Subsequently, somebody got smart enough and started, I read a proposal for a bill, and I think something's already in the works, so that law enforcement can access NICS so that before they return a firearm, they can make sure somebody's not an illegal possessor. NICS, as not everyone is aware, has information that is not available to typically to local law enforcement officers. The stipulation is, if you are a law enforcement agency, in order for you to access NICS electronically now, just as the gun sellers do, they must be a contributor to the NICS database, which makes perfect sense. However, in order to do that, it takes a considerable amount of time, labor. My question is, are you willing to support legislation that would help provide some funding to local law enforcement so that we can provide the personnel to do those return inputs to the NICS system, and it will help improve the entire system nationwide and throughout the state of Nevada?
Yeah, I think that so when we go back to talking about the idea of being able to use the database and running the background checks, you've got to make sure that the folks necessary have access and the information in it is reliable, valid, and complete. And I think if that's the route that we're going to go, then it's incumbent upon us to make sure that people who need access have got it, and that the information that's in there is reliable, accurate, and complete. So I would support those types of measures to make sure that those that are checking the database have the most up-to-date ability to get the latest information and have access to it.
Thank you, Carter.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is Adam Burke. I'm a special education teacher here in Clark County School District. I send emails all the time from the National Education Association. My question to you is, with this sequestration coming up on March 1st, I ask you please not to let those sequestration cuts go into effect. I'm sure you're aware, Clark County School District has cut $550 million in the past 2 years. Past 2 years. That's because the money that comes from the north, money that comes from you guys in Washington, D.C. If that takes into effect, it was said by our Deputy Superintendent, Pat Skarkowski, last week when he was testifying to the Senate Education Committee of the Carson City, that the school district will take a 5.9% cut in Title I, II, and III funds, which being Title I, II, and III funds is special education and early childhood and all those Title I schools. And then what is your, well, I'm asking you to please, this is another question, to please vote on universal pre-K education.
So first, the sequester, as I said, look, no, for as many people, I think everybody in Washington has said, basically they don't want the sequester to go through. Problem is, nobody's been able to come up with something that everybody will agree on to not let it go through. Look, nobody wants to see what little dollars come from. I mean, only about 10% of the school district's budget comes from the federal government, but it comes with a lot of strings, as you probably well know. And you can't use it where you need it, because you got to use it where Washington's telling you to use it. And the last thing that, out of that 10%, if you're going to take a cut in that, it would be devastating to a lot of programs that we have here in Clark County. Look, nobody wants to see the sequester. I don't want to see the sequester go through. I'm hoping that I have the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to vote on something that allows us to go in and be deliberate and saying, look, this program can take 10%, this program can take 2%, this program probably needs an extra 3%. Okay? But that's what we need to do. And that's my position on it. So I'm hoping that I get that opportunity.
966.
You've been waiting so patiently right here in the front row. Yes.
I have 2 issues that I'm very
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Hold it close.
Sorry.
Hold it close to your mouth.
I have 2 issues that I'm very concerned about. One, I have a daughter who's a teacher, a great teacher at one of the schools for the underprivileged here in Clark County. She's taken a hit on her salary, and when this thing happened in San Diego, I was terrified about how we're going to protect our teachers and our vulnerable children in the schools. The second issue I'm worried about is the issue of the private processing of guns and ammunition between parties that are private. For example, the kid who killed the children in Sandy Hook was obviously mentally unstable. His mother was not. How do we prevent guns being inherited or given to people, such as criminals and mentally ill people, without any kind of a background check? Those are my 2 issues.
And important issues, and I'll go with the gun one first, then we'll go back to schools. And that's what I've said. Look, the background checks have to, you got to check everybody. And there's a proposal also for the what's called straw man purchasing, where somebody buys a gun for somebody else who's not eligible to have the gun, and to close that loophole as well. And I think those are things that have real possibility of being passed into law. It's the least we can do to try to protect our teachers and our most vulnerable children. Going back to your daughter who's a teacher, and again, salary, the vast majority, almost 90% of the school district's budget is state and local money. About right, because of state and local, right? So the money that we get really doesn't, the money that the federal government gives really don't go to salaries. It may go to professional development classes and things like that, but it doesn't go to salary money. And that's, again, going back to the idea of the sequester, realizing that even though the money we give doesn't go directly to salaries, it helps fill in a hole that then may allow other monies to go to salaries. I mean, the money just moves around. And it comes back to, we've got to avert the sequester.
My concern is, when I heard those folks in Colorado talking about their gun bill, there were people there that were talking about arming teachers. My daughter spends 7 days a week working on this. She doesn't have time to become an armed vigilante.
Nor should she have to if she doesn't want to. I mean, one of the other proposals that's being talked about is making that an availability if a school district wants to use it. Look, The last thing that Washington DC needs to be doing is dictating to school districts what they have to do on this issue. We should be able to give options and support school districts in following the options that they think is best for their community. 25 more, and we've got 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to go rapid fire. So please, keep your commentary to a minimum, and let's just get the question out, and let's try to crank through them as quickly as we can.
Number 7. Number 7.
And yeah, don't feel obligated to have to ask. If your question's already been asked, you know, let's give somebody who's got something new. 7? 7?
Hi,
Congressman Hack, thank you for coming. I'm a product of mental illness. My mother was a manic depressive. I have 4 brothers, 3 of which sit in chairs now. A while back, you used to be able, as a family member, take your loved one to the hospital and say, they're not acting quite normal. The government decided that we can't do that anymore. The sick person has to know that they're sick. Now, if anyone in this room has ever had mental illness touch them, they realize that pills don't work if they're not taking them. The school in Newtown is a school next to the town that I came from. How can we fix the mental health system in our country? We look at homeless people. Used to be people walking along the street talking to themselves. We're really talking to themselves now. We're all talking in earphones, so you can't tell the difference. When I took my brother to the hospital, he was an attorney. And if he had a broken arm, they would have taken him in. It took me 3 full days of staying awake, watching him to protect him from himself and to protect him from leaving the house. How can we get hospitals to take these people in and not dismiss them, where they will hurt the people in the schools?
Yeah, it's funding.